I couldn't believe I was standing in that ER, staring at the one person who'd betrayed me so completely 5 years ago. My sister Marina, unconscious on a gurney, her life suddenly in my hands because there was no one else. 5 years. That's how long it had been since everything fell apart between us, since the lies and the manipulation started tearing our family apart. And now, here she was, helpless, and I was the only one who could make the call. The truth about what really happened all those years ago was locked inside my chest like a grenade with the pin pulled. But fate had just thrown us both into the same room, and what happened next would either heal everything or destroy what little remained. They say karma works in mysterious ways, but this was something darker, more complex, and infinitely more shocking than simple revenge. Because the secret Marina had been keeping wasn't just about the lie she told, it was about why she told it, and what she was willing to sacrifice to keep it buried. Then everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and justice got flipped completely upside down in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. What she whispered to me when she woke up? I still can't decide if it was a confession or another manipulation. The screech of tires still echoes in my nightmares, you know? One moment I'm in the passenger seat while my sister Marina drives us through downtown Chicago, laughing about something stupid, and the next, complete darkness. I'm Scarlett, 28 years old, and I never imagined that the person I trusted most in this world would orchestrate my death for money. The blinding impact, the shattering glass, the way everything went silent. I couldn't believe this was how my story would end. But here's the twisted part. When I woke up 3 weeks later in that sterile hospital room, tubes running through my arms like I was some kind of science experiment, Marina wasn't there holding my hand. She wasn't crying by my bedside or praying for my recovery like any sister would. No, she'd vanished the moment the paramedics arrived, leaving me unconscious and alone in Northwestern Memorial. The nurses whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, their voices laced with confusion about the sister who'd backstabbed her own flesh and blood. "Where's your family, honey?" one asked, her eyes filled with pity that made my stomach twist. I told her I didn't know, but deep down, something dark was already stirring, a suspicion I wasn't ready to face. The truth was knocking, but I wasn't ready to open that door yet. My head pounded with every heartbeat, and my ribs felt like they'd been crushed under a truck. The doctor explained the extent of my injuries with that detached medical tone they all have. Fractured skull, collapsed lung, internal bleeding that nearly killed me twice on the operating table. "You're incredibly lucky to be alive," he said, but luck had nothing to do with it. This wasn't some random accident caused by bad weather or a distracted driver. Someone wanted me gone, humiliated and erased from existence, and the shocking realization was starting to creep through the fog of painkillers. Marina's face kept flashing in my memory, that strange look she'd given me right before insisting she drive my car. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension I'd dismissed as stress. The police officer who came to take my statement seemed almost bored, treating it like just another traffic incident in a city full of them. But when I mentioned that my sister had insisted on driving my car that day, my car that I'd just had serviced the week before, his pen stopped moving. "And where is your sister now, Miss Scarlett?" he asked, suddenly more alert. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them to avoid the betrayal rising in my throat. "I wish I knew," I whispered, and that's when everything started to unravel. My phone had been destroyed in the crash, but the hospital gave me a replacement so I could contact family. I logged into my email with shaking hands, expecting messages from Marina asking about my condition, maybe even an apology for leaving so abruptly. Instead, I found automated alerts from my bank, attempted withdrawals from my trust fund, transactions I never authorized, transfers that had been flagged as suspicious. Vengeance wasn't even on my radar yet. I was still trying to process the fact that my own sister had tried to access my inheritance while I was fighting for my life. The dates matched perfectly. Every attempt made while I was in the coma, unable to stop her. That's when the pieces started clicking together like a horrible puzzle I didn't want to solve. Marina hadn't left me at the hospital because she was traumatized or scared. She'd left because she thought I wouldn't wake up. She thought she'd finally have access to everything our parents left us when they died. Everything she'd always resented me for managing. The family drama we'd always swept under the rug, her gambling debts she thought I didn't know about, her growing desperation. It all made terrible sense now. I lay there in that hospital bed, machines beeping around me like a countdown, and realized that my near-death experience wasn't an accident at all. It was attempted murder, and I was staring at the evidence on a cracked phone screen, wondering what came next. The morphine drip kept the physical pain manageable, but nothing could numb the betrayal of what I was uncovering. I spent the next 2 days pretending to sleep whenever nurses came in, using every waking moment to dig through my accounts and piece together Marina's deception. She'd lied to the bank, forging medical documents claiming I'd given her power of attorney before the accident. Documents that looked legitimate enough to fool the first level of verification. My heart raced every time I found another fraudulent attempt, another lie stacked on top of lies. The trust fund our parents had set up before they passed held nearly $3 million. Money meant to be split equally between us when we both turned 30. But Marina couldn't wait, and apparently she couldn't share either. I called my accountant, David, from the hospital bathroom where no one could overhear. His shocking gasp when I told him I was alive told me everything I needed to know. Marina had already contacted him, spinning some story about my tragic passing and her need to settle my affairs. "Scarlett, oh my God, she said you didn't make it," he stammered, his voice cracking. She was asking about expediting the transfer of assets, claiming she needed to pay for funeral arrangements. Funeral arrangements. For me. While I was lying in a hospital bed 20 floors above the city, very much alive and now very much aware of how deep this went. Karma was going to be a real thing for Marina. I promised myself that. The financial trail led me down a rabbit hole I wasn't prepared for. Offshore gambling sites, cash advances maxed to the limit, loan sharks with interest rates that would make a bank executive faint. Marina owed over $400,000 to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. I found emails she'd sent to various creditors, each one more desperate than the last, promising that funds would be available soon and to please give her just a few more weeks. The timeline was damning. Her most aggressive promises were made just days before our drive, days before the brakes on my Tesla mysteriously failed. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind to her spiral, so focused on my own career in tech consulting that I'd missed my sister's descent into desperation. Then I found the mechanic's report from my regular service appointment, buried in my email archives. Everything had been perfect. Brakes at 98% efficiency, all systems functioning normally, no issues whatsoever. But during the accident investigation, the preliminary report mentioned catastrophic brake failure and possible fluid line rupture. I'm not a mechanic, but I know the difference between gradual wear and deliberate sabotage. My hands shook as I forwarded everything to my personal attorney, Marcus Finch, a sharp-minded lawyer who'd handled our family's estate planning after our parents passed. His response came within an hour. 3 words that changed everything. Don't trust anyone. Not the police who might bungle the investigation. Not the hospital staff who Marina might manipulate. Not even distant relatives who might take her side out of family betrayal politics. Marcus arrived at the hospital that evening as a patient advocate with proper paperwork, complete with a visitor badge and a professional demeanor that fooled everyone. We spoke in hushed tones while he pretended to review my care plan, his legal mind already strategizing. "If you want justice, real justice, we need ironclad evidence," he explained, his eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Right now, you have suspicious timing and financial desperation, but that won't hold up in criminal court. We need the car, we need forensic proof of tampering, and we need to catch her in the act of another crime." The thought of setting a trap for my own sister made me physically ill. But what choice did I have? She'd already tried to kill me once. What would stop her from trying again when she realized I'd survived? That night, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I told the hospital staff I was being transferred to a private rehabilitation facility, arranged by Marcus through a medical liaison who specialized in trauma recovery cases. My friend Stella, the only person besides Marcus I could trust, coordinated the quiet transfer through administrative channels that kept my location completely off the record. Marina thought I was still in the ICU, still vulnerable, still unaware of her schemes. But I was awake now, not just physically but mentally, and I was done being the victim. The revenge I was planning wasn't about anger or hatred. It was about making sure she could never do this to anyone else, never destroy another life in her selfish pursuit of money. As Stella drove me to her apartment in silence, I stared at the Chicago skyline and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't prey anymore. Stella's apartment became my war room, my sanctuary, my headquarters for what I was about to unleash. She didn't ask questions when I showed up with nothing but discharge papers and a list of things I needed: burner phones, cash, access to her guest room, and most importantly, her silence. "Whatever you're planning, count me in," she said, pouring us both strong coffee at 2 a.m. while I laid out the evidence across her dining table. The financial motive was crystal clear now that I had distance and clarity. Marina needed me dead to access the full trust fund immediately, bypassing the age requirement and the equal split our parents had carefully structured. She'd gambled away her future and decided mine was worth stealing. Marcus worked his legal magic from the shadows, helping me install monitoring on my own accounts to track Marina's next moves. We set up alerts for any access attempts, any contact with the bank, any communication with the estate attorney she didn't know had already been briefed on her fraud. Within 48 hours, she took the bait. Another forged document, another claim of emergency access, another lie about settling my final expenses. Except this time, everything was being recorded, time-stamped, and saved to a secure server that would hold up in any court. I watched the notifications come in from Stella's laptop, each one a nail in Marina's coffin, and felt nothing but cold determination. My self-worth wasn't tied to her anymore. I was reclaiming everything she'd tried to take. The surveillance footage I had Marcus install outside my apartment building showed Marina entering 3 times in 1 week, using the spare key I didn't know she'd copied. She wasn't there to water my plants or collect my mail. She was searching for financial documents, insurance policies, anything that could speed up her access to my assets. Watching her rifle through my desk drawers on camera, her face twisted with frustration and greed, was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't a sister in grief. This was a criminal covering her tracks. The payback I was planning wasn't just about legal consequences. It was about showing her that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of her life. But I needed the car. That damned Tesla was the smoking gun, the physical evidence that would transform this from a civil case into criminal prosecution for attempted murder. Marcus discovered it had been towed to a police impound lot pending the accident investigation, scheduled to be released to the insurance company for salvage auction in 5 days. 5 days. We had less than a week to file an emergency preservation order, retrieve it, get it to an independent forensic examiner, and document the sabotage before the evidence was destroyed forever. "This is going to be risky," Marcus warned, his lawyer brain already calculating the angles. "If Marina finds out you're alive and investigating, she might run or worse, she might try again." But running wasn't something I was built for. Not anymore. Stella drove me to the impound lot at dawn, both of us dressed in coveralls and hard hats like we belonged there. The attendant barely glanced at the court order Marcus had filed. Completely legitimate, perfectly timed, absolutely necessary. My Tesla sat in the back row, crumpled and broken like my trust in family had been. Seeing it in person made everything real again. The impact point on the driver's side where Marina had been at the wheel, the deployed airbags stained with my blood, the eerie silence of a machine that had almost become my coffin. The forensic mechanic Marcus hired met us there, a gruff man named Pete who'd testified in over 100 criminal cases. He whistled low when he got under the car. "Somebody cut your brake lines clean through," he said, showing me photos on his phone. This wasn't wear and tear. This was deliberate, professional almost. Professional. The word hung in the air like poison. Marina hadn't just wanted me dead. She'd researched how to do it, maybe even paid someone with money she didn't have to make it look like an accident. Pete documented everything, taking samples of the fluid, photographing the cuts from every angle, writing a report that would stand up against any defense attorney's challenge. "You're lucky you crashed when you did," he added quietly. "Another mile and you'd have been on the highway doing 70. Nobody survives that." But I had survived, and now I had proof. The truth was no longer just my suspicion. It was documented, certified, and ready to destroy Marina's entire world. As we loaded the evidence into Stella's truck, I felt the first real smile cross my face since the accident. Marina's desperation accelerated exactly as Marcus predicted. While I hid at Stella's apartment, monitoring everything from a safe distance, my sister launched a full-scale assault on my reputation that I never saw coming. She went live on social media, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn, crying crocodile tears about her mentally unstable sister who'd been struggling with paranoid delusions before the accident. The shocking audacity of it took my breath away. She sat there in my apartment, wearing my mother's necklace she'd clearly stolen, telling thousands of followers that I'd been erratic, possibly suicidal, making wild accusations against family members. "I'm just trying to protect Scarlett's legacy," she sobbed into the camera, "but she needs professional help, and I might have to seek legal guardianship to ensure she doesn't hurt herself or squander the family inheritance." The comments section exploded with sympathy for her. Strangers offering support and prayers. Business contacts expressing concern about my mental health. My phone, the burner I was using, blew up with screenshots from friends who'd seen the broadcast, their messages ranging from confused to horrified. "Is this true?" one former colleague asked. "Do you need help?" She was building a narrative, I realized with cold clarity, a public record of my supposed instability that would justify her controlling my assets, maybe even having me committed. It was brilliant in its cruelty, a preemptive strike against any accusations I might make. If I came forward now claiming she'd tried to kill me, everyone would think it was exactly the kind of paranoid delusion she'd warned them about. Cheated didn't even begin to cover how I felt. Marcus watched the videos with the calculated interest of a chess player studying his opponent's moves. "She's creating reasonable doubt before you've even filed charges," he noted, rewinding to study her body language. "But she's also giving us a timeline of her whereabouts, admitting she has access to your apartment, and establishing her financial interest in your affairs. She's building our case for us." He was right. But it didn't make watching her perform easier. This was the girl I'd grown up with, who'd shared secrets under blankets during thunderstorms, who I'd defended against bullies and helped through breakups. The family drama between us had always existed. Rivalry, jealousy, the typical sister stuff. But I never thought it would escalate to this level of betrayal. The social media campaign worked exactly as she'd intended. Within 3 days, I received a formal notice that Marina had petitioned the court for emergency conservatorship over my person and estate, citing my diminished capacity following traumatic brain injury and her duty as next of kin to protect me. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, barely enough time to mount a defense, which was probably her strategy. She needed legal control before I recovered enough to fight back, before the bank's fraud investigation went too deep, before everything fell apart. "This is actually perfect," Marcus said, and I thought he'd lost his mind. "Perfect? She's trying to have me declared incompetent." But he smiled that shark smile lawyers get when they see an opening. "And when you show up at that hearing, very much competent and very much ready to file criminal charges, the judge is going to see her petition for exactly what it is: attempted fraud and abuse of legal process." Still, 2 weeks felt like an eternity when every day brought new lies. Marina gave an interview to a local news station about the tragedy of mental illness in families, using my accident as a cautionary tale about the importance of intervention. She appeared on a podcast about inheritance disputes, carefully avoiding names but making it clear she was dealing with a difficult sibling situation. The character assassination was methodical, public, and devastatingly effective. Old friends stopped reaching out. My boss at the consulting firm sent a formal email suggesting I take an extended leave to focus on recovery. She was erasing me from my own life, humiliated me in front of everyone I knew, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it without revealing my hand too early. The dignity I'd always carried felt like it was slipping away with every viral post, every sympathetic comment on her manipulative performances. But I held the line. I documented everything she said, every lie she told, every contradiction in her story. Stella helped me create a detailed timeline matching her social media posts against bank records, showing how her sob stories about my condition coincided perfectly with her attempted financial transactions. The pattern was undeniable. She was using public sympathy as cover for systematic theft and manipulation. "She's not just trying to steal your money," Stella observed during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "She's trying to steal your entire identity, your reputation, everything that makes you you. That's not greed. That's something way darker." And she was right. This wasn't just about the trust fund anymore. It was about Marina's need to be the only daughter, the only success story, the only one who mattered. What happened next would determine if she succeeded. The night of the Lakefront Foundation Gala arrived like a storm I'd been tracking for weeks. Chicago's financial elite would gather at the Peninsula Hotel. Investors, philanthropists, business leaders who'd known my family for decades. Marina had RSVP'd weeks ago, probably planning to network and solidify her narrative of the responsible sister managing a tragic situation. What she didn't know was that I'd been planning too, coordinating with Marcus and a particular ally who'd proven more helpful than I'd ever imagined. Richard Blackwood, the managing partner at Thornton Capital and my late father's closest friend, had received my evidence package 3 days prior. His response had been immediate and furious. "Your father would be devastated. We'll handle this properly." I spent hours getting ready at Stella's apartment, transforming from the broken victim Marina thought I was into someone she wouldn't recognize. The navy Armani gown hugged my still healing ribs uncomfortably, but pain was temporary. Impact was forever. My hair, styled professionally for the first time since the accident, covered the remaining scar on my temple. Makeup concealed the fading bruises, turning me into a ghost of my former self, or maybe a preview of who I'd become. "You look like you're about to burn someone's world down," Stella said, adjusting my necklace. "Good," I replied, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "Because that's exactly what I'm about to do." The revenge I was serving wouldn't be hot and emotional. It would be ice cold and permanent. Walking into that ballroom felt like entering a battlefield where everyone else thought it was a party. Crystal chandeliers reflected off champagne glasses, string quartets played Vivaldi. Women in designer gowns air-kissed, while men in tuxedos discussed market trends. I spotted Marina immediately. She stood near the main bar, laughing too loudly at something a venture capitalist was saying, working the room like she owned it. She wore red, always her power color, and held court with people who had no idea they were conversing with a would-be murderer. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the old sisterly instinct to protect her from herself. Then I remembered waking up alone in that hospital, and the feeling passed. Justice wasn't about feelings. It was about consequences. Richard found me first, his silver hair and commanding presence parting the crowd like Moses with the Red Sea. "Scarlett," he said warmly, loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. "You look absolutely radiant. I'm so relieved to see you've made such a remarkable recovery." Every word was deliberate, calculated to carry across the room. I watched Marina's head snap toward us, watched her champagne glass slip from suddenly nerveless fingers, watched her face cycle through shock, terror, and desperate calculation in under 3 seconds. "Thank you, Richard," I replied, matching his volume. I'm grateful to be here. There were moments in that hospital when I thought I might not make it, but apparently, I'm harder to kill than some people assumed. The nearby conversations died completely. Marina's face had gone white as her knuckles. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that. Years of lying had made her adaptable. She rushed over with arms outstretched, tears already forming, playing the relieved sister role like she'd rehearsed it. Oh my God, Scarlett, I've been so worried. Why didn't you call me? I've been trying to reach you. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with trembling lip and glistening eyes. But Richard stepped smoothly between us. His smile polite, but his eyes granite hard. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, Marina. I think there are some questions about your recent activities that need addressing. Her smile froze. Around us, the city's most influential people were very quiet, very attentive, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood. This was the moment. This was where everything changed. The truth was about to be exposed in front of everyone who mattered. The next 72 hours moved with the inevitability of a glacier crushing everything in its path. Richard hadn't just confronted Marina at the gala. He'd done it surrounded by witnesses who mattered, board members, investors, the kind of people whose opinions shaped reputations in Chicago's business world. He'd calmly, methodically outlined the evidence of her attempted fraud, the suspicious timing of my accident, the forged documents trying to access my trust fund. He never raised his voice, never made it dramatic. He simply presented facts the way you'd present a quarterly earnings report. These are serious allegations that warrant investigation, he'd concluded, while Marina stood there trembling, her red dress suddenly looking like an admission of guilt. I wanted to give you the opportunity to address them publicly before I involve the authorities. Marina had tried to salvage it, spinning a story about misunderstandings and trying to help during my recovery, but her voice cracked on every third word. The investors watched with the cold assessment of people who'd built fortunes on reading human behavior. I saw their expressions shift, saw the mental calculations as they stepped away from her socially, professionally, permanently. In Chicago's elite circles, reputation is everything, and hers was disintegrating in real time. She'd tried to play the long game, but I'd played it longer and better. By the time security escorted her from the peninsula, her phone was already blowing up with canceled meetings, pulled investments, deleted connections. The social murder she'd attempted on me had boomeranged with devastating precision. But I wasn't done. I was just getting started. Marcus had prepared the real trap with the precision of a master craftsman. We'd leaked information through carefully selected channels that I was keeping critical corporate documents in my downtown office, including the seal and signing authority for the family trust. Documents she'd always known I kept there after our father died. It was bait, pure and simple, and Marina's desperation made her predictable. She needed that seal to forge the final documents that would give her control before the conservatorship hearing, before everything fell apart, before she lost access forever. Marcus had cameras installed, motion sensors activated, and a direct line to the Chicago PD fraud division. "She'll come," he'd said with certainty. "Cornered animals always do." She came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, 4 days after the gala. I watched the whole thing unfold on Stella's laptop. Marina using a copied keycard to access the building, avoiding the main security desk, making her way to my office like she'd planned the route. She wore black, carried a bag of tools, moved with the jerky nervousness of someone who knew they were committing a crime but felt they had no choice. The cameras caught everything. Her jimmying open the locked cabinet, searching through files with shaking hands, finding the corporate seal and stuffing it in her bag along with blank signing documents. "Got her," Marcus said quietly, phone already to his ear. "Send them in." I watched 2 detectives intercept her in the lobby, watched her face crumple when they said the words, "You're under arrest," watched the backstabbed sister become the caught criminal. The arrest made the morning news, not the headlines, but prominent enough that everyone who needed to see it did. "Chicago woman arrested for attempted fraud and theft," the Chiron read, with Marina's booking photo looking nothing like the polished socialite who'd cried on social media. The charges were extensive: attempted fraud, identity theft, forgery, breaking and entering. Marcus was already working with the prosecutor's office on the bigger charges: attempted murder based on the forensic evidence from my car, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The state's attorney loved the case. It had everything: money, family drama, clear evidence, a defendant who'd been stupid enough to commit multiple crimes while under investigation. "She's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum," the prosecutor told me during our meeting. "More if we can prove premeditation on the vehicular assault." Karma wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a sentencing guideline. I sat in on the bail hearing, my first public appearance since the arrest. Marina's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and I saw everything there: hatred, disbelief, desperate pleading, the death of whatever sisterhood we'd once shared. Her lawyer argued for release, citing her ties to the community and lack of flight risk. The prosecutor countered with the surveillance footage of her attempted theft, the evidence of the car sabotage, her pattern of escalating criminal behavior. "Your Honor, the defendant attempted to murder her own sister for financial gain, then tried to steal from her while she recovered in a hospital. She is clearly willing to do anything to access funds she's not entitled to." The judge set bail at $500,000, money Marina didn't have, couldn't borrow, and wouldn't receive from anyone who'd seen her true face. She was led away in handcuffs while I watched, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of justice served. What happened next would unfold in a courtroom, but the outcome was already decided. The trial lasted 3 weeks, though the verdict was never really in doubt. Marina's defense attorney tried every angle: temporary insanity from gambling addiction, misunderstandings about financial arrangements, claims that the car sabotage was done by unknown third parties. But the evidence was overwhelming, documented with the kind of thoroughness that comes from having time to prepare, and a victim who'd been careful, methodical, and absolutely committed to seeing justice done. The forensic mechanic testified about the cut brake lines. Bank officials confirmed the forged documents and attempted unauthorized transactions. The surveillance footage played on a screen for the jury to watch Marina breaking into my office. And I testified, spending 2 days on the stand recounting every detail from the accident to my awakening to the systematic betrayal I'd uncovered. Marina's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone weaponizing the legal system over a family drama dispute. "Isn't it true you and your sister had always been competitive?" he asked during cross-examination, trying to suggest mutual animosity. I looked directly at the jury when I answered. "Competition is normal between siblings. Attempting murder for inheritance money is not. I wanted to believe the accident was just that, an accident. I wanted to be wrong about my own sister. But the evidence doesn't lie, and neither do cut brake lines." The jury members' faces told me everything I needed to know. They weren't seeing sibling rivalry. They were seeing attempted murder motivated by greed, followed by calculated fraud and character assassination. The truth had finally been revealed in the way it needed to be: clearly, undeniably, permanently. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. Marina Evans didn't just try to kill her sister, she tried to erase her. First physically through vehicular sabotage, then financially through fraud, then socially through a campaign of lies about mental illness. She wanted Scarlett Evans to disappear so completely that no one would question her accessing the family fortune. But Scarlett survived. She investigated. She gathered evidence. And now Marina faces the consequences of believing her sister's life was worth less than $3 million. I watched Marina crumble in her seat, watched her whisper desperately to her lawyer, watched the reality of her situation finally penetrate the delusion she'd been living in. The vengeance I'd sought wasn't about hurting her. It was about making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdicts in a steady voice that echoed through the silent courtroom. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of identity theft. guilty of forgery, guilty on every single count. Marina's sob was the only sound, a broken thing that held no power over me anymore. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later, but we all knew what was coming. The prosecutor had already outlined the recommended sentence: 10 years for attempted murder, consecutive sentences for the fraud charges, restitution for all damages. Marina would be nearly 40 when she got out, her youth and opportunities destroyed by her own greed and betrayal. I felt no triumph, no joy, just the quiet satisfaction of a chapter finally closing. Sentencing day was brief and almost anticlimactic. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over the trial with patient fairness, delivered her decision without ceremony. "Ms. Evans, you attempted to murder your sister for money, then compounded that crime with systematic fraud and manipulation. You showed no remorse, no accountability, and no respect for human life or the legal system. I'm sentencing you to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. 12 years. Marina's gasp was audible. Her lawyer patted her shoulder uselessly. The bailiff stepped forward to take her into custody, and just before they led her away, Marina looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, but the words were hollow, meaningless, years too late. Sorry didn't undo the sabotaged breaks or the hospital abandonment or the stolen reputation. Sorry didn't give me back the sister I'd lost long before the accident. I walked out of that courthouse into Chicago sunshine that felt different somehow, cleaner, brighter, full of possibility instead of dread. The press was waiting, cameras and microphones thrust forward, questions shouted about how I felt, what I planned next, if I'd ever forgive Marina. I stopped at the microphone cluster, took a breath, and spoke clearly. Justice has been served. My sister made choices that destroyed our family and nearly ended my life. I hope she uses her time in prison to understand the value of what she threw away. As for me, I'm moving forward, not with hatred or bitterness, but with the certainty that I did everything right. I survived. I investigated. I let the system work. And now I'm free to build a life she can never touch again. Then I walked to the car where Stella waited, climbed in, and didn't look back. Reclaiming my life meant leaving Marina's destruction behind, and that started now. The old family mansion sold 3 months after the trial ended, bought by a tech entrepreneur who planned to convert it into a startup incubator. I watched the movers empty out decades of memories, furniture my parents had chosen, artwork that had hung in the same spot since childhood, the dining table where we'd celebrated holidays and birthdays back when family meant something other than betrayal and attempted murder. Stella stood beside me as the last truck pulled away, squeezing my hand when I couldn't quite hide the tears. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly. That house was full of ghosts. She was right. Every room held memories of Marina and me as children, before greed and gambling had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. I couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't walk those hallways without seeing her face the night before the accident. The money from the sale, nearly $2 million after fees and taxes, went into a foundation I'd established in my parents' names. The Scarlett and Thomas Evans Educational Fund would provide scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing business degrees, helping kids who didn't have trust funds or family wealth to fall back on. It felt right, taking money that Marina had tried to kill me for and using it to help people who actually needed it, who would appreciate the opportunity instead of squandering it on gambling debts and desperate schemes. The first scholarship award ceremony was scheduled for May, and I'd already reviewed applications from dozens of brilliant students whose essays about overcoming adversity made my own story feel almost small by comparison. This was legacy, not money sitting in accounts, but lives changed and futures built. My new apartment in the West Loop was smaller, modern, blessedly free of history. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, and I'd furnished it with pieces I'd chosen myself, not inherited, not connected to anyone or anything except my own taste. Stella helped me move in, and Richard stopped by with a housewarming gift. A first edition of my father's favorite book with an inscription that made me cry. To Scarlett, your father always knew you had steel in your spine. He'd be proud of how you've used it. RB. I put it on the shelf next to the only photograph I'd kept from the mansion. My parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful, and completely unaware that one daughter would try to murder the other over the legacy they'd left behind. The letter arrived from prison 6 months into Marina's sentence, forwarded through Marcus because I'd made sure she didn't have my new address. I stared at it for 3 days before opening it, half afraid of what it might contain, what emotions it might stir up. When I finally tore the envelope, I found 5 pages of Marina's handwriting, the same looping script she'd used to sign birthday cards and Christmas presents. She wrote about prison life, about therapy sessions where she was supposedly confronting her gambling addiction and understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. I know sorry isn't enough, she wrote on page 3. I know nothing will ever undo the fact that I tried to kill my own sister for money. I've lost everything. My freedom, my reputation, you. The trust fund seems so meaningless now compared to what I destroyed. I read to the end, then sat in my new living room watching the river flow past, considering what to do with this attempted reconciliation. Ultimately, I took the letter to my parents' grave, the first time I'd visited since the trial. Their headstone was simple, elegant, just names and dates with the inscription, "Together forever," beneath. I knelt on the grass and read Marina's letter out loud to them, every word of regret and remorse and too late understanding. Then I pulled out my lighter, the same one my father had used for his cigars on special occasions, and burned the letter right there, watching Marina's words turn to ash and scatter in the wind. She doesn't get forgiveness, I told my parents stone. Not from me, not yet, maybe not ever. But I'm not carrying her guilt anymore. I survived what she did. I got justice. And now, I'm choosing peace. The paper curled and blackened, the last physical connection between us reducing to nothing, and I felt lighter than I had in months. Some wounds heal better without forgiveness, without reconciliation, without the pressure to make things okay when they're fundamentally broken beyond repair. Walking back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt free. Free from the family drama that had defined too much of my life. Free from the fear that Marina might try again, might succeed next time. Free from the obligation to love someone just because we shared DNA when she'd proven that blood means nothing against greed. The truth about family is that you don't owe toxic people your forgiveness or your energy just because they're related to you. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, build a life they can't poison, and refuse to let their choices define your happiness. Marina would serve her sentence. I would live my life. And somewhere in that separation was the justice we both deserved. Her for what she'd done, me for what I'd survived. A year after the sentencing, I stood on the balcony of my apartment watching Lake Michigan stretch to the horizon, coffee in hand, and realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about Marina. Not about the accident, not about the trial, not about the betrayal. Just a regular Tuesday where I'd worked on a consulting project, had lunch with Stella, and come home to a space that was completely mine. That might not sound revolutionary, but after months of my entire existence being defined by what my sister had done to me, it felt like a miracle. I'd reclaimed my self-worth not through revenge or public vindication, but through the simple act of building a life she had no part in, no claim to, no ability to destroy. The woman who'd tried to kill me for $3 million had lost everything, while I'd discovered that my real worth had nothing to do with money at all. Richard invited me to join the board of Thornton Capital, my father's old firm, offering me the chance to shape the kind of investments and philanthropic work that would have made my parents proud. I accepted, not because I needed the money or the prestige, but because I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, something that created value instead of destroying it. My first board meeting felt like stepping into my father's shoes, continuing a legacy that Marina had tried to hijack and I'd fought to preserve. "You have his instincts," Richard told me afterward. But you have something he didn't. You've seen the absolute worst of family and survived it. That makes you stronger than you realize. Maybe he was right. Maybe surviving betrayal, attempted murder, and systematic character assassination had forged something in me that normal life never could have. The therapy helped more than I'd expected. I'd started sessions 3 months after the trial, initially resistant to the idea that I needed to process trauma when I'd already gotten justice. But my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, helped me understand that legal vindication and emotional healing were two different things. You won in court, she explained during our 5th session. But your brain and body are still carrying the weight of what happened. The accident, the hospital, discovering your sister's betrayal, that's complex trauma layered on family trauma layered on grief for your parents. You can't just lawyer your way through that. She was right, annoyingly so. We worked through my trust issues, my hypervigilance, the way I couldn't sleep without checking my locks 3 times, the panic attacks that hit when someone mentioned sisters or family or inheritance. Slowly, week by week, I started to feel less like a victim who'd fought back, and more like someone who'd simply moved forward. Dating again felt impossible until it didn't. His name was James, a professor of criminology at Northwestern, who I'd met when he invited me to guest lecture about my case in his class on white-collar crime and family violence. He was kind, patient, completely unbothered by my complicated past, and the first person I'd been vulnerable with since the accident. You know the worst part? I told him 6 months into our relationship, during one of those late-night conversations where you accidentally reveal your soul. I still miss her sometimes. Not the person who tried to kill me. The sister from when we were kids, before everything got poisoned. And I hate that I miss her like it makes me weak or stupid. James had just held me while I cried, understanding that grief and justice could coexist, that I could be simultaneously glad Marina was in prison and devastated that our relationship had died long before the brake lines were cut. The nightmares faded but never completely disappeared. Maybe once a month I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the crash or the moment I saw the attempted bank withdrawals or Marina's face when she realized I was alive at the gala. But they were just dreams now, not prophecies or warnings, my brain processing old trauma, not preparing for new danger. I'd gotten better at managing them, at reminding myself that Marina was behind bars, that the forensic evidence had been preserved, that I'd done everything right and could do nothing more. Some scars don't heal cleanly, and that's okay. The point wasn't to forget what happened or pretend it didn't shape me. The point was to not let it define every moment of every day. I was Scarlett Evans, tech consultant, board member, scholarship founder, survivor. The betrayal was part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story anymore. 10 years after the accident, I received a call from the prison administration. Marina was up for her first parole hearing. She'd served 8 years of her 12-year sentence, and Illinois law required a review. Did I want to submit a victim impact statement? Did I want to attend the hearing? The questions hung in the air while I stood in my office, now managing partner at my own consulting firm, trying to remember the woman I'd been when this started. That Scarlett would have dropped everything to make sure Marina stayed locked up. This Scarlett wasn't sure what she wanted. I need to think about it, I told the administrator, and spent the next 3 weeks doing exactly that. Stella thought I should go and make my voice heard. James supported whatever I decided. Dr. Chen reminded me I didn't owe anyone performance of trauma or revenge. I could choose what served my healing. In the end, I attended but didn't speak. I sat in the back of the hearing room while Marina, now 38 and looking 10 years older, addressed the parole board. She'd lost weight. Her hair had gone partially gray, and the designer clothes were replaced with prison-issue scrubs. She spoke about her addiction recovery, her therapy progress, her understanding of how profoundly she'd betrayed the only family she had left. I destroyed my sister's trust, her sense of safety, and nearly her life, she said, voice steady but eyes watery. No amount of time will undo that. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to be free. But I've spent 8 years trying to understand the person who could do what I did. And I promise you, I promise Scarlett, that person is dead. I killed her the same way I tried to kill my sister. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never comes back. The parole board asked their questions. A psychologist testified about Marina's progress. The prosecutor from the original trial submitted a statement recommending denial. She'd served barely 2/3 of an already lenient sentence for attempted murder. I watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing a play they'd once starred in but had since moved on from. When the board chair asked if I wanted to make a statement, all eyes turned to me. Marina's eyes met mine, and I saw everything there. Hope, fear, resignation, genuine remorse that might or might not matter. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and spoke without notes. 10 years ago, my sister tried to kill me for money. She sabotaged my car, abandoned me in the hospital, tried to steal my inheritance, and then attempted to destroy my reputation to cover her crimes. Justice was served when she was convicted and sentenced. I paused, considering my next words carefully. But justice and healing are different things. I've spent these 10 years rebuilding everything she tried to take: my career, my sense of safety, my ability to trust. I've created a life she has no part in. Whether she stays in prison or gets released doesn't change that. What matters to me is that she can never harm anyone else, never manipulate another family member, never let greed override basic human decency. If this board believes she's genuinely changed, that's your call to make. I won't beg you to keep her locked up, and I won't forgive her if you let her out. I'm simply here to remind everyone that attempted murder isn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It's a choice. And choices have consequences. I sat back down, my statement complete, dignity intact. Marina was crying silently, but I didn't look at her again. I'd said what I needed to say. The board denied parole. While the inmate has made notable progress in treatment, the chair read from their decision, the severity of the original crimes, premeditated attempted murder and systematic fraud, combined with the relatively short time served, does not support early release. Parole is denied. Next review in 3 years. Marina's shoulders slumped. Her lawyer whispered something consoling, and I felt nothing. Not victory, not vindication, not even relief. Just the quiet acknowledgement that the legal system was still doing its job, that Marina would serve more of her sentence, and that my presence or absence wouldn't have changed the outcome. I walked out of that hearing room the same way I'd walked out of the trial, toward my car, toward my life, toward a future that finally felt mine. The past would always be there, but it didn't have power over my present anymore. That was the real victory. Not Marina's continued imprisonment, but my complete liberation from needing it to be okay. There's a picture on my desk now, one I had professionally taken last year at the 5th Annual Evans Educational Fund Scholarship Ceremony. 50 students, ranging from 18 to 45, all first-generation college students pursuing business degrees with money that once sat in a trust fund Marina tried to kill me for. They're all smiling, holding certificates, their faces full of hope and determination, and the kind of ambition that builds things instead of destroying them. When I look at that photo, I don't see the betrayal or the sabotaged breaks or the months of recovery. I see proof that even the ugliest family drama can be transformed into something meaningful, something that honors the people who actually deserved honoring, my parents, who'd built that wealth through hard work and wanted it to mean something beyond just accumulating more money. The Scholarship Foundation became my unexpected legacy, the thing I'll be remembered for long after the trial fades from Chicago's collective memory. We've funded over 200 students now, watched dozens graduate and start their own businesses or join firms or launch nonprofits. Several have come back to volunteer, to mentor new recipients, to pay forward the opportunity they'd received. "You saved my life," one student told me at last year's gala. A young woman from the South Side who'd grown up in poverty but graduated summa cum laude and now works at Goldman Sachs. "Not literally like your sister tried to end yours, but you gave me a future I wouldn't have had." That matters. And maybe that's the karma of it all. Marina's greed and attempted murder ultimately created opportunities for people who'd actually appreciate them, who'd use them to build rather than destroy. I still think about the accident sometimes, how I felt in those moments between the screeching tires and the impact, the certainty that this was how my story ended. I think about waking up in that hospital alone, abandoned by the person who should have been there. I think about the cold rage that fueled my investigation, the steel that developed in my spine as I gathered evidence and set traps, and watched my sister destroy herself. But mostly, I think about the moment I realized that surviving wasn't enough. I had to build something worth surviving for. The revenge was sweet, the justice was necessary, but the real triumph was refusing to let what Marina did define the rest of my life. She tried to reduce me to a victim, a cautionary tale, a tragic accident statistic. Instead, I became someone who turned trauma into purpose and pain into progress. Marcus retired last year, his last major case being the appeal denial of Marina's sentence. We still have lunch monthly, his sharp legal mind now focused on his grandkids and golf handicap. Richard passed away 8 months ago, leaving me his seat on the Thornton Capital Board and a letter thanking me for honoring your father's memory better than anyone could have hoped. Stella got married, moved to Portland, but we talk weekly, our friendship forged in crisis now tested and strengthened by normal life. James proposed on the anniversary of my testifying against Marina, a choice that seemed odd until he explained, "You faced your worst nightmare and didn't let it break you. I want to spend my life with someone that strong. We're getting married next spring, small ceremony, no family drama. Literally, since I have no family left except the one I choose to build." The final piece fell into place last month when I sold my consulting firm to a larger competitor for an amount that made the trust fund look modest. Not bad for the girl who was supposed to die in a car crash orchestrated by her own sister. I'm using part of the money to expand the scholarship fund nationally, to create programs for trauma survivors pursuing higher education, to build something that outlasts me and Marina and the whole horrible story. The rest I'm investing in sustainable businesses and innovative startups, companies that solve problems instead of creating them. My parents would have approved, I think. They'd built their wealth carefully, ethically, with an eye toward legacy. Marina wanted to grab it all immediately, burn through it on tables and cards and desperate bets. I chose to grow it, share it, transform it into something that actually matters beyond making rich people richer. That's the difference between us, always has been. So that's my story, from attempted murder to justice, from hospital bed to scholarship fund, from broken trust to rebuilt life. But here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you never saw coming? Family, friend, partner, someone who was supposed to protect you but tried to destroy you instead? How did you handle it? Did you fight for justice, or did you choose to walk away? Drop your story in the comments below because I guarantee someone reading this needs to hear that they're not alone in navigating family drama and the revenge of simply surviving. And if you've ever wondered whether forgiveness is actually necessary or just something society pressures us to perform, tell me your truth. I'm curious if my choice to burn that letter and refuse reconciliation resonates with you, or if you think I should have handled it differently. Your perspective matters, so share it freely and honestly. Also, what would you have done at that parole hearing? Would you have spoken? Stayed silent? Not shown up at all? Because I'm still processing my own choices, and hearing yours might give me clarity I didn't know I needed. If these questions are hitting you where you live, if this story made you think about your own complicated relationships with family members who've backstabbed you, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into the messy, uncomfortable truths about justice, karma, dignity, and what it really means to reclaim your life after someone tries to take everything from you. These aren't surface-level feel-good stories. These are real, raw explorations of human nature at its worst and resilience at its finest. So subscribe, engage, and let's keep this conversation going, because the most powerful thing we can do is share our stories and realize we're not fighting these battles alone.